Good afternoon and welcome to Volunteering Victoria's webinar series. So at today's webinar, I have guests from the City of Melbourne to talk to us about how COVID-19 has affected their volunteering programs. But before I introduce our guests, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. So in the interest of others, please keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar. You should have arrived on mute, but you should be able to check down the bottom of the screen by hovering your mouse over the screen. There's a public chat box, which you're able to send messages or hellos to other participants. And please feel free to use that or the Q&A box to submit questions to our panelists or to let us know if you're having any technical troubles. This webinar will be available to stream on Volunteering Victoria's website within the next few days. So without further ado, let me introduce my three guests today, Jane Lawson, Melissa Height and Tara Jamovska. So Melissa Height is passionate about conserving biodiversity and engaging the community in environment and sustainability issues. Melissa coordinates the Gardens for Wildlife program, which aims to inspire Melburnians to create space for nature in the city. Gardens for Wildlife Victoria is a statewide network of community group and local government partnerships active in more than 25 municipalities across Victoria. The network supports collaboration, connections and wellbeing alongside environmental objectives. The City of Melbourne program has approximately 15 volunteers who are using innovative ways to deliver the Gardens for Wildlife program online and maintain social connections through gardening. So Tara is the Tourism Operations Officer for Visitor Services at the City of Melbourne. City of Melbourne last year celebrated 30 years of Visitor Services program consisting of 400 volunteers across 8 locations. The Visitor Services program provides personalised face-to-face service assisting visitors with Melbourne and Victoria-based information. The volunteers are a symbol of Melbourne due to their iconic red uniform and are the welcoming face of over 2 million visitors annually. And I'm sure many of you who are online know exactly the type of volunteers throughout the city who I mean. Tara has 8 years experience working within the tourism industry, including 5 of those in the red uniform and formally trained in tourism and business management studies. And finally, Jane Lawson. So Jane is the volunteer programs lead at the City of Melbourne. Jane is accomplished and passionate volunteer management and development professional with over 13 years of experience across local government and not-for-profit sectors. Jane is recognised as a leader and advocate across the volunteer sector and is committed to ensuring volunteers are valued, recognised and celebrated. So welcome guys, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Sarah.
Fantastic. So I will get you guys to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role. And I'll start with you first, Jane.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so as mentioned in that bio, I'm the volunteer programs lead. I commenced at City of Melbourne September 2018, September 11th to be precise. I play a central advice and coordination role across COM with respect to engagement and management of volunteers across all of the programs, so supporting the staff as well. I'm very lucky to work with an amazing team of volunteer managers who are all very passionate and committed to enhancing volunteering at the City of Melbourne. And as mentioned, volunteers do support several programs across the organisation. So this includes tourism, ageing and inclusion, international students, events, libraries, and parks and city greening.
Fantastic. Thanks for that introduction, Jane. And Tara, did you want to kick off next?
Yeah, thank you. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm with the Visitor Services team at City of Melbourne. So along with my coordinator, my fellow employee, I manage the City Ambassador program. So you'll see the volunteers which normally are positioned along Swanston Street. There's also the Queen Victoria Market Visitor Hub, which is only 2 years we've had that service, so it's one of our newer services. Cruise ship program, so we greet passengers down at Station Pier, as well as we have a wide variety of other services. So the Fitzroy Gardens Visitor Centre, along with we manage Cook's Cottage, so we have volunteers that are actually in period costumes, not just in the iconic red uniform. You've also got the Melbourne Visitor booth in Bourke Street Mall, as well as also at the Melbourne Visitor Hub at Town Hall, which used to be formerly at Federation Square due to the Metro Works closing that site. As mentioned, I've been 8 years with City of Melbourne. So essentially after I graduated from university, I did a student placement at City of Melbourne and I haven't left since. And I've really enjoyed the time with City of Melbourne, especially with the visitor services team.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's lovely when we're doing these webinars, when we can actually point to a visual, you know, experience where people are like, oh yeah, I know that program. And finally, Melissa, did you want to just introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I commenced in my role in 2018, returning to work after having my first baby. So I do a part-time role coordinating the Gardens for Wildlife program, which is a partnership with Westgate Biodiversity, Billy Nursery and Landcare and community members. So it's a free program that sees trained volunteers visit private land to provide insights on improving their spaces for wildlife. So I work collaboratively with the community to facilitate the city's participation in the Gardens for Wildlife Victoria network and develop and implement a program that's specific to the City of Melbourne. So a key feature of my role is to work with volunteers to build capacity to visit gardeners and to encourage participation by gardeners. So it's the perfect role for me as I get to work with community volunteers, co-designing and delivering the Melbourne Gardens for Wildlife program. But I also feel like I'm contributing to biodiversity and conservation outcomes, which is something that takes me back to what I'm passionate about and what I studied at university. So I've just returned from maternity leave with my second baby in what's been a pretty challenging return to work due to COVID. But yeah, I'm continuing to be inspired by the enthusiasm and passion of our volunteers in our program.
Absolutely. And I can personally vouch for how fantastic your volunteers are, because I did, after doing the research for this webinar, go, ooh, that sounds like an amazing program, and it's still running during COVID, and I live in the City of Melbourne. So I've had the opportunity to meet some of Melissa's volunteers firsthand, which is great. So another thing that I like to do before we get into the substance of how COVID-19 has really affected your programs and what you've sort of done this year, I do like to always talk a little bit about how we got involved in volunteer management, tell a little bit of a superhero origin story. Because I think one of the strengths of our sector is that a lot of people come from quite diverse backgrounds. So it's really, really great to figure out how people kind of, for want of a better word, fell into the sector. So Melissa, I'll throw to you.
Sorry, Sarah, I was just muted there. Yeah, sure. So yeah, I studied conservation ecology and environmental management at university, and I completed my honours in ecology. So definitely not, you know, volunteering per se or at all. But I did look at the importance of incorporating community knowledge into natural resource management decisions. So in the 13 years since completing my degree, I've worked in a range of community engagement roles in state and local government. And I've always been passionate about engaging the community in environment and conservation projects. That's what I'm really passionate about and like the area that I like working in. So this role in particular at City of Melbourne is my first time managing volunteers specifically. So always been involved with the community and community engagement, but yeah, my first time managing volunteers and working with volunteers.
And that's awesome. You know, everybody's always at a different stage, and I think it's so nice to hear from different people who've, you know, had a different journey into volunteer management. So Tara.
Yeah, like Melissa, I had no formal training in volunteer management. My degree was in a Bachelor of Business, Tourism Management. I'd always kind of seen, either working in Flight Centre or jetting off somewhere. I was really kind of passionate about travel, but also I've always been passionate about Melbourne and the city, which is why when I saw the student placement offer, which was nearly 8 years ago for the Melbourne Visitor Centre, Federation Square, I thought that was a great opportunity, a great way to enter the industry, the tourism industry. And essentially that position was working alongside some of the volunteers, the 400 volunteers that we mentioned before. And essentially I've been, my day to day is about volunteer management. I may have not had any formal training, but over those 8 years, I've been involved in volunteer recruitment, been involved with ongoing training, professional development. So it's just really integral to our role with visitor services. We say that if we didn't have our volunteer network, we couldn't run the services that we could. We've got 8 different locations across the municipality, but also pop-up services that we provide as well. And we really need that support, from volunteers. And it's just been a kind of learning experience over time that, you just kind of, in a way, stumble across being a volunteer manager, but it's fantastic. There's just so much that you learn about managing volunteers, and it's just been a really good opportunity.
Fantastic. And finally, Jane, if you want to give us your superhero origin story.
I love that, Sarah. Superhero origin story. Yep, that's good. I'll go with that. Yeah, my background's actually teaching. So like a lot of us, I fell into the volunteering sector, I guess, and into volunteer management. I was looking to return to work after being a stay-at-home mum for over 5 years, and an opportunity came up, which was a really good one, getting involved in a local government volunteering program, which was with the City of Adelaide at the time, where we were living. And that was it. That just, from the moment I started there, I knew I'd found my calling in life. And 13 years later, I'm still loving what I do and very, very passionate about it, about volunteering and advancing volunteering, and particularly in local government. I really sort of like the challenges that it presents across local government, and obviously, and then across Victoria and Australia. I'm really keen to be involved at that level as well. So yeah, definitely it's something that sort of just happened, just sort of fell into it, but absolutely love it and love representing the volunteering sector at sort of at that local government level.
Absolutely. It's, I think one of the reasons, and I do think all volunteer managers are superheroes, hence my use of the term, but I do think it is important to know that not everyone's journey is the same, and you bring the strengths of your background with you. So I'll throw to you, Jane, just to talk a little bit about the impact at a broad level that COVID-19 has had on volunteering at council. And then we might hear from Mel and Tara about their individual programs.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so look, I think like most organisations, everything sort of came to a grinding halt in regards to our volunteer programs, which happened on 16 March. In fact, we were just talking about it this morning and what the scenario was and how quickly it happened. So on that day, pretty much, well, actually everything, all face-to-face volunteer programs ceased. And sadly, for one particular program, funding was discontinued as well. So the whole program shut up shop, which was not a great scenario. But we were able to sort of pivot really quickly, embrace technology platforms such as Zoom, which I think everyone's very familiar with now. And it just meant that a number of our programs remained ongoing by operating virtually, and Mel will talk more about Gardens for Wildlife and that particular program. So we're really lucky. We've got a centralised volunteer management system, so it really helped keep us in touch with our volunteers. We're able to reach out to them straight away, provide them with up-to-date information, keep them informed, and just keep them engaged with the organisation. I think the worst thing is well, we knew the worst thing would be is just to lose touch with the volunteers. So it was really important that we continue to either work with them or just at least have a point of contact with them. So, but yeah, Tara and Mel will be able to elaborate further on what's been happening at that program level.
Fantastic. So I might go to you next, Tara, and if you're happy to share with us what's going on with tourism operations.
Absolutely. So obviously since the 16th of March, the volunteer programs at our visitor services have been put on hold, and there was a short time between the 16th and 18th of March that we ran the services with staff only. But since the 19th of March, all City of Melbourne visitor services have been closed. There was a period when we did have that kind of easing of restrictions in June. We were planning to open our services in July, but with the second wave and the increase in cases, that never occurred. So pretty much we've been closed our services for over 6 months now. The only service that's still running for us is that we still have a visitor information inbox, which is an email inbox that visitors can respond, ask questions about what's going on in the city. Very quiet at the moment. We might only get one per week, but we also do respond to any kind of social media inquiries from visitors as well. But obviously due to all the COVID restrictions in Melbourne, and also especially the 5K limit, people can't come into our city, they can't come in and enjoy it. So we're really looking forward to the next stage of the easing of restrictions, and hopefully would be able, to slowly open our services. We probably won't be able to open all 8 services at once. We're going to just trial it and, see how we go with one service and see what the demand's like, because currently, obviously, there's no international visitors, there's no interstate visitors, and currently no one from regional Victoria can come and use our services. But it's just something that we're kind of working towards.
Fantastic. And yeah, it is. I can only imagine how excited you guys are for the next stage to start kind of thinking about opening up more fully. Melissa, do you want to talk to us a bit about where Gardens for Wildlife is?
Yeah, so we've been able to continue operations and continue our program during COVID by using innovative ways to deliver the Gardens for Wildlife Melbourne program. So our volunteers have been meeting online via Zoom, sharing virtual tours of their gardens to share information about wildlife friendly features. And we've been offering virtual garden visits. So generally where face-to-face garden visits would occur, we're offering those online. We've primarily been using Zoom or video call platforms, but we also request photos and sketches of the gardens ahead of time, so the volunteers can prepare, learn more about the space, and they'll talk to the gardener and do that all online. So they allow us to continue the program and continue to grow our network of wildlife gardeners in the city and maintain those social connections through gardening.
That's fantastic. And we know that sometimes, just who our volunteers are and what the substance of the program is can have a bit of an influence on our decision to remain open or to shut up shop. So I thought it would be great if you could each tell me a little bit about the demographic of your volunteers and whether that had any impact on your decision to open up or adapt your program at all. So Melissa?
Yeah, so we've got approximately 15 active volunteers. They're all female and they range in age and gardening experience, but I don't think the demographic of the volunteers really influenced the decision to go virtual as much as what their passion and enthusiasm for the program did. So our program's still only starting out. We only commenced conducting pilot garden visits in November last year. So I think the fact that completing face-to-face garden visits was still a fairly new experience for many of our volunteers. They were more willing and open to trial different ways of doing things. So we'd been working together for a year to get the program up and running. So everyone was really keen to do whatever they could to keep the momentum as much as possible. So I was actually on maternity leave in March when the initial decision was made to transform to virtual garden visits. But the volunteers adapted really quickly to meeting on Zoom. They were really willing and open to trial the virtual visits. Trialing the virtual visits gave, a positive focus in an otherwise really unsettling time. Our meetings have become more regular since moving online, and the virtual visits have been a continued learning experience. So it's really been a bit of a journey for the volunteers, but I think they've really, enjoyed that shared learning and that ability to be able to keep going. And, I think it's a credit to their enthusiasm, more so than having any kind of demographic link, I guess.
Absolutely. So, Tara.
Yeah, I agree with Melissa. It's not necessarily the demographics that obviously forced our closure. It's essentially we had no visitors. No one was able to come into Australia, let alone come into the state or come into Melbourne. And visitor services wasn't seen as an essential service, not something, to man. And it's something where the restrictions really impacted our services. But in terms of demographics, majority of our volunteers, we found that 45% of them are 70 years and over. So that's nearly half of our volunteers that are at risk of contracting COVID-19. So that even when we're at the point of reopening our services again, we will be just trialing with staff only, because there is a big risk as well, because 45% of our volunteers are at that high risk category. So we need to be mindful for that as well. But what we found really important during this time is we wanted to keep connecting with the volunteers. And that's why we developed the Keeping in Touch program, where, on a weekly, fortnightly or monthly basis, we were contacting our 400 volunteers just to check in to see how they are, because volunteering with us was such a big part of their lives that some volunteers, we have one volunteer who's volunteered for 30 years. So that's a huge part of their lives, and they'd be coming in on a weekly basis. So just to stop that connection, just because our services were closed it wasn't on our radar. We wanted to keep that engagement with them and keep that passion alive for Melbourne, which they all do have. So that's just a little bit about the tourism side.
Great. And you've both touched on it a little bit. So, maybe you could just highlight a little bit. First, Melissa, what changes did you make in terms of adapting your program to go virtually? Obviously, you've mentioned things like regular meetings and I guess the Zoom process, but maybe if you could break it down a little bit more for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we've been meeting on Zoom, and we have changed from monthly to fortnightly meetings as a way of keeping connected during stage 3 and 4 restrictions. So we used to meet face to face on a monthly basis. We're now catching up online every fortnight, and that's been a really nice way, like Tara said, a nice way to stay connected and keep in touch with our volunteers, and for them to keep in touch with each other as well. But the biggest adaptation has been the virtual visits. It seemed to come pretty naturally to our volunteers to move to digital platforms for communications. So it was surprising to hear that other Gardens for Wildlife programs across the state were a bit more reluctant to do virtual garden assessments. But we did give a presentation at a network meeting, and after hearing that, I think some of the programs decided it wasn't too hard after all. So I think sometimes, that thought of, doing things virtually, something that you usually do face to face, and moving to an online platform, it can be really overwhelming. And particularly the virtual visits don't quite align with everything that Gardens for Wildlife is all about, particularly with relation to some of the social outcomes that our program strives for. So our volunteers have done a really excellent job of reframing to think of our virtual visits as an opportunity during these challenging times. And as a result of this, it's been a lot easier to see the benefits and to keep going with it. So we've had to make some changes to the way we conduct visits, and a little bit more preparation is required from the volunteers. Part of things, you know, we're asking the participant to send through photos and draw a map of their garden and things like that prior to the visit. The virtual visit also requires the participants to describe their gardens a little bit more, and sometimes provide sketches or other details. And some elements just can't be done, like assessing soil type or other things, but we're just doing what we can. And everyone's really understanding of that, you know, there is limitations to doing things virtually, but, you know, we can still have a conversation, we can still start that process. And we're not thinking of the virtual visits as a replacement to the face-to-face, but just a stopgap until we can get back out there. We already have built into our program 3 and 6 months follow-up with participants, where the volunteers would get back in touch with a participant and say, how are you going, how are you finding it, you know, how's the gardening going. So in the future, part of that will be, once we are able to get back out there, that 3-month follow-up will potentially be touching base and also seeing if they want to follow up with a face-to-face visit. So for those people that received a virtual visit, they potentially will get a face-to-face visit in the future if they want to.
Fantastic. And Tara, you did mention a little bit about what you have done to stay connected, but if you could give us a bit more detail around what you've done, because I know you've had such an emphasis in your team about, even though we're not operating at this time, how can we keep in touch with our volunteers?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we established the Keeping in Touch program very early on when we had to close the services back in March. So pretty much what the program entails is there's numerous things that we're doing. So one of them is our kind of virtual volunteer care. So that's essentially on a weekly or fortnightly basis, we're doing Zoom chats with the volunteers, and we're doing it per their program that they volunteer at and even per their shift. These have been a fantastic opportunity for the volunteers to connect with each other, so with their colleagues, but also for us to connect with them. It's a time that we can kind of, in the beginning, it was more just for their well-being and to keep in touch. But I think over time, it's just been a nice social kind of gathering, something that they've been looking forward to in their week. And it's also quite a fun time. It's a nice social occasion where we've been doing different themes. So the volunteers have been sharing like old baby pictures of themselves, and it's a good time just to have a laugh during kind of this a bit of a stressful time. But what we also do is not everyone is obviously tech savvy. It's what we've seen a lot is a lot of the volunteers are really embracing the technology, where when before COVID, we may have not had such a big uptake. So it's really refreshing to see how many volunteers are enjoying the video Zoom chats, but some of them just they just want to receive a call, or we just receive a check-in email, and we do that again on a fortnightly or monthly basis, and they let us know how frequently they want to be kept in touch. We do a monthly newsletter, which we did pre-COVID, and that's just a newsletter that keeps the volunteers up to date on what's happening in the city, what's happening with the volunteer programs, and any tourism news in Melbourne and Victoria. We also do, so for their shifts, when they would come in for their shifts, we'd always have a 15-minute briefing before their shift to give them updates about what's happening in the city. We're still doing that, but we're doing it in a video briefing, so you can actually find them on YouTube, so they're available for the public as well. So it's pretty much our staff members have been doing either weekly, fortnightly or monthly a video briefing. And when different restrictions were easing, it showed what was happening in the city, like which cafes and restaurants were going to open, when you were able to go to regional Victoria, for example. So we had that kind of briefing video, but also briefing notes, and they were quite fun and energetic. When we could go into the city, we went to do some filming at Cook's Cottage and, you know, go down to the arts precinct at South Bank. So it was a real nice way for volunteers to experience Melbourne, but from, you know, from home. We also do have an intranet, which is the tourism portal. So volunteers are able to access that at home. And pretty much it has different fact sheets about Melbourne. So we developed fact sheets, especially in May and June, about, you know, what was open, you know, which attractions were open, what was the limitations in terms of capacity numbers, you know, pre-booking tickets. But it also has other information like different useful websites and blogs like the City of Melbourne blog and any other industry updates as well too. Really what's been a real benefit with this communication that we've done is that we're contributing that to their volunteer hours. So each volunteer will get 1 hour of contribution per week, because we see as, you know, they're engaging with us online, it's still part of their volunteering and they're keeping in touch with us. So it's been really good to see that, you know, majority of our volunteers are really embracing this keeping in touch program.
That's fantastic, and great that you've had such a great response. And speaking of the response, I guess the next question is really about feedback that you've had from volunteers. So Tara, if you want to continue and just talk to us a little bit about what feedback you've had from your volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, recently we actually went out to survey the volunteers because we wanted to review the Keeping in Touch program and see, you know, how it was going, if we needed to have any changes. So we surveyed all 400 volunteers and 126 came back with the survey, and nearly 60% of the volunteers really valued the Keeping in Touch program because it was connecting them with our staff. So they've really felt appreciated and well looked after by our staff. But also we've been working with the volunteers for years. You know, they're seen just as integral as our, you know, our work colleagues. So they really appreciate just keeping in touch with us, with the staff members. And you can see some of those volunteer comments there, you know, on the presentation. It felt like the staff went above and beyond in an authentic way. You can feel that value they have, that we took that time and effort for them. But what they've also done, which has been really lovely, is they've been making us, I've had a volunteer send us a thank you video just to check in to say, thank you for keeping in touch with us. We want to know how you are, how are you going? Say hi to the team with us. And that's just really lovely because it's just a two-way looking after us, because we're not just looking after them, they're looking after us as well too. We also found it's really, like I mentioned before, it's a really important social event. They found it's just a really highlight of their week. But also they're finding it's just strengthening the connection they have with their fellow volunteers and their fellow colleagues. You know, 50% of the volunteers that we surveyed said the Keeping in Touch program has greatly helped their connection with fellow volunteers. And what they're doing is they're doing their own activities outside of the ones the City of Melbourne are making. They're making their own private Zoom chats, sending funny emails, but also just doing regular calls and check-ins during this time. And we've had, you know, volunteers come to us, go, I just talked to this volunteer. It sounds like she's having maybe a bit of a rough time. Do you want to touch base with them? And that's what's fantastic about, you know, about this. But also what we found too, it's really reinforced the volunteer commitment. As volunteers, you know, 85% that we surveyed are likely to return back to volunteering. They're really, you know, the passion is there to come back to volunteer. You know, nearly every week they're asking me in the Zoom chats, when can we go back to volunteering? I'm like, we'll let you know when the service is open. But also what they like to is that they're kept in the loop. They know what's happening in council, they know what's happening in the tourism industry. We're keeping them up to date and all the latest on easing of restrictions or and so forth. So they're really embracing that, but also they're embracing technology too. They found that by having this Keeping in Touch program, volunteers who never had an iPad are purchasing iPads. They're embracing technology, which is absolutely fantastic. But the main one is really, it's improved their general well-being during this really difficult time. Nearly 70% of the volunteers surveyed said that this program helped maintain their general well-being, and that, you know, their workplace or their university didn't reach out to them like we have. We've gone over and beyond, and they've felt really valued by that.
That's great. And yeah, I think you never know exactly how central the role volunteering is in someone's life until that, you know, connection is stopped, and or until that changes, and it's wonderful that you've gotten such great feedback. Melissa, did you want to add anything? Obviously, your volunteers are still meeting regularly by volunteering online.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I think the response has been incredibly positive. Like Tara said something interesting that really resonated with me, in that, you know, it's not just us looking after the volunteers, but they're looking after us. And, you know, I can really resonate with that as, myself living through these times as well as everyone else and all of our volunteers. And, you know, it's doing so much for me to be able to continue to engage with our volunteers and to keep engaging with the program, and, you know, to keep being part of this. And it's just been such a positive experience for me as a volunteer manager, as much as it has been for our volunteers. And I truly find that they are looking after me as much as, you know, we're hopefully looking out for them. But I'll share a quote from one of our volunteers who summarizes the general feeling and vibe expressed by all of our volunteers really well. She says, "It's been so valuable being able to stay connected with the other Gardens for Wildlife volunteers during COVID through our fortnightly Zoom meetings. My favourite part is where we share plant and wildlife stories. We all have different experiences with nature, so through sharing of these stories, I'm constantly learning new species or tips and tricks to attracting more wildlife. I love that we can keep inspiring the community to make their homes more wildlife friendly. It gives me some positivity in light of these unsettling times." And I think that's just really lovely quote that just summarizes exactly how all of our volunteers feel, the vibe that I get from them. Another volunteer has described our meetings as her happy place, and another has expressed how much it means to her to be able to maintain social connections and focus on something that's positive and lighthearted. The other great thing I think that's had a really positive response from us is that the Zoom meetings have made it a lot easier for us to invite guest speakers, and for our participants to attend other webinars. So the learning opportunities we've been able to provide and access during this time has been really positive, and something that our volunteers have really engaged in and enjoyed. A lot of them have been going off and engaging in other webinars and things, and then coming back to our meetings and sharing what they've learned. And I think, that kind of thing has become really accessible, and something that's a really positive outcome from this. And I think being able to utilize the time to build capacity and confidence among our volunteers has been a fantastic opportunity, and it's been really well received and appreciated.
Fantastic. And Jane, was there anything you wanted to add in terms of, I guess, feedback from volunteers from the City of Melbourne at large? I know you kind of have a macro view of City of Melbourne's volunteer involvement.
Yeah, I think the girls have summed it up really well, but surprisingly, through our centralised system, I've actually probably received quite a lot more feedback than I was expecting. I think a lot of the volunteers are now aware of my role at City of Melbourne, and yeah, so I do get some really lovely feedback from time to time, and one that the quote below there on that slide, came from one of our tourism volunteers, and she just said it's really comforting to know that we're in your thoughts, and I'm sure we all appreciate what you and your staff have done to keep us informed and involved. And it's just really heartening. And I find even when I'm having a bit of a down day or feeling not so great, I've kept, all of these quotes in a document, because I think they're really uplifting to read. And here are people that actually can't volunteer right now in regards to particularly visitor services, but they can't do any face-to-face volunteering. So to read these lovely quotes and the feedback that we're getting, it's rejuvenating for the staff as well. I think it keeps us going, and we know that hopefully soon we'll be all back together and it'll be all wonderful again. But yeah, it's just lovely how we're getting this feedback and it's coming through regularly. So yeah, I think they really appreciate it. Yeah.
Fantastic. And we do have a few more questions, but a reminder to anyone online, if you do have a question for any of the panelists, please feel free to type something in the chat and we'll get to it at the end of the webinar. So I'd like to talk a little bit about retention. Have you seen many volunteers retained, or have you seen much of a drop-off? And Tara, I'll throw to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So in terms of the tourism volunteers, we've had no resignations during this time for volunteers that actually think due to COVID. We've had a couple of resignations, about 7 or so, but they were due to personal reasons, which would have happened when we would normally be operations. So in terms of our volunteer pool, they're constantly feedback is they want to come back. When we hit go and we can open the services, they'll be there in their uniforms ready to go. I think the biggest concern with our volunteers is they just want to make sure that the service is going to be of use. You know, they miss coming into the city and interacting with public because, as I mentioned, it's a big part of their lives. It would be a 4-hour shift per week that they'd be doing for, you know, sometimes at least 10, 15, 20 to up to 30 years. But I think the concern our volunteers have is once the city opens up again, will visitors still need us? Will they still need to talk to someone face to face, or is it going to be all now virtually and digitally? So that's where a big concern of our volunteers is. They want to come back, they want to come to the service. It's just, you know, it's when. It's really the big question of when.
Fantastic. And Melissa, did you have anything to say about your volunteer retention?
Yeah, like Tara, we haven't had any resignations. We've actually had an increase in engagement and attendance at our meetings. I think virtual meetings are definitely more accessible, and they make it a lot easier for people to get involved. That and the fact that people have no competing social commitments. But yeah, obviously attending from the comfort of your lounge room is a lot easier for people. So although there are some elements of the meetings that are more difficult to run virtually, like those opportunities for, you know, individual connections and relationships, and there's you know, that is more challenging virtually, but there's a lot of positives and the group have really embraced this. The virtual meetings have also provided some opportunities for our volunteers that have had to move away geographically to remain involved and connected in the program. So an example is one of our volunteers, she had to move back into state, but she's able to regularly attend our meetings and she's still conducting garden visits. However, had our program not moved online, she would have had to have resigned. So there are some positive examples, I guess. The virtual visits allow our volunteers to stay engaged. They also allow us to continue to grow our community of gardeners, making space for nature in the city. We've been able to promote our program as a positive activity to be engaged in while we stay home. So the mental and physical benefits of gardening and social connection, they're more important than ever. And moving to a virtual program model allows us to keep pursuing these goals, and it's providing opportunities not just for our volunteers but for the community to be involved in something positive during this time. So we will return to face-to-face meetings and garden visits when it's safe to do so. However, I expect that we'll continue to do a combination of both virtual and face-to-face meetings and visits. I think that's going to become a new feature of our program. Maintaining some ability to conduct virtual visits will allow for more vulnerable members of the community to continue to engage in the program, even as we move out of these current restrictions. So yeah, look, I think it's, you know, virtual visits and virtual meetings certainly aren't the same, but there are some positives to take from it, and I think it's had a really good response.
That's fantastic. And moving a bit further from engagement, from retention, I guess I'm keen to know whether or not you've engaged volunteers in different projects around council, and maybe Jane, if you're happy to speak to this.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So particularly for some programs where it just was not possible to get the volunteers back in a face-to-face capacity, we started to explore, what kind of options or things could we put in place to continue to keep them involved, which was really important, obviously virtually. So we've got a volunteer management team at City of Melbourne, and we knew that engaging volunteers in other ways was really vital. Obviously, we're looking at the social, we're talking about social connections, but we thought, well, what can we get them involved from a volunteering perspective, from a health and wellbeing perspective as well, and keeping them connected with the organisation. So we've done a few different things. So we ran a short-term project where we've been developing for quite a while now a e-learning induction module, and we thought that presented itself as a great opportunity where volunteers could review that e-learning for us. They're the ones that are going to be doing that e-learning when they come on board, any new volunteers. So let's get our experienced volunteers reviewing it and telling us what improvements we can make. So that was really successful. We had
well, you're just dropping out a little bit, Jane.
Over 50 expressions of interest come through. They reviewed. Can you still hear me?
Yep, all good. Keep
Can
going.
you hear me, Sarah?
Yep, keep going.
Sorry, hopefully that'll be fine now. Yeah, so that's been a fantastic experience and really rewarding for the volunteers that got involved, and again we got great feedback from that. And what they provided was meant that our induction module is a lot better than what it was now, which is fantastic. And another fantastic initiative that we've just put in place is setting up our very first volunteering consultative committee. So we did expressions of interest for that, and a number of volunteers submitted an application to join the committee, and we begin at the end of the month, where we're going to have volunteers representing most of our programs, and they will come and give us advice basically on different things like volunteer recognition, program improvement and those sorts of things. So yeah, so we've run a few small projects, which has been good, and we've got a few other things in the pipeline ready to go, particularly, as I said, for some of those visitor services volunteers that are just so keen to continue staying involved. So, but it's been incredibly rewarding, and we're quite proud of what we've achieved over the last few months.
Fantastic. And yeah, it's so great that you've been able to involve volunteers in some projects that have probably been sitting in your drawer for quite a long time, unable to get a bit of movement in. I keep saying to everyone who I'm talking to that now, if you have the capacity to engage in a bit of co-design with your volunteers, to make sure that you start the program back up on the right foot is a fantastic thing to do. So just moving to technology, and I thought I'd just ask you all to let us know what's been useful technology platforms for you guys, what you found really helpful. There are a few different logos there, and I know we all have our preferences, but Melissa, if you're happy to share first.
Yeah, sure. We've primarily been using Zoom for our meetings and also for our garden visits. We allow the gardener or the participant to elect what kind of platform they want to use for their virtual visit, but primarily everyone's pretty comfortable and with the Zoom now, so we've been using that. The 45-minute time limit can be a bit of a challenge, but we're finding the use of premium accounts is overcoming that. So yeah, look, that's been working for us. We also use a platform called Trello, which has been a really great way for having online conversations and sharing of documents. It's just a pretty easy and flexible visual way to manage projects. and our team share photos, they collaborate on documents, and they share information. So that's been a really good one. We also have a private Facebook group for our volunteers and program participants. So we can share participant photos, links to interesting articles, links to webinars that people might be interested in, that kind of thing. So yeah, they're probably our three main technology platforms that we've been using, in addition to obviously City of Melbourne uses Better Impact, and that's where our volunteers go in to log their hours, etc. So, and I'm sure Jane will talk about that a bit more.
Yep, so it's a nice segue. Jane, did you want to talk to us about the main platforms that you've found helpful?
Yeah, particularly from my end, being able to communicate to all of the volunteers. So we've got probably about 1,100 active volunteers. Yeah, definitely for us, our volunteer management system, which Mel said is Better Impact. So it's just a great way to communicate with them, and you can deliver emails out in bulk or individually. You can sort of target groups and things like that. So that's just been so invaluable to be able to, and even actually our projects, we've been able to set things up in that, and they can do the project through the management system, which is fabulous. So and the good thing is all of our volunteers know how to use it, so it's really easy for them. It's not like we have to introduce something new, even though, as we've discussed, they've all been pretty responsive to using new forms of technology, which is great. Something that we also loved to see was during National Volunteer Week, we streamed a couple of live events through that, and we used a platform called Participate Melbourne. Some other councils have something similar, but it's an online community where community members can have their say on big issues and so on. But the fantastic team at Participate Melbourne were able to open that platform up for us, so volunteers could view those live streamed events, which was fabulous as well. So that's another thing that they've been able to access during this time. So they're probably the main things, and Zoom as well. And I've been really lucky to be included in a couple of visitor services Zoom chats, which has been really nice, and meeting some of the volunteers and getting to know them, which has been fabulous.
That's great. And Tara, I'm sure most of the platforms have already been mentioned, but if there were any that you wanted to sing out particularly?
Just in regards to, obviously, Zoom is what we do with the video chats, but we also use that to record our video briefing, which we display on YouTube. So that's been really great to share the video link on YouTube. It's available to the public, so it's really just it's available to all. So it's not just for our volunteers. Anyone from around the world could just pop in and view it and get to know more about the city. So we're really kind of connecting with people like we've never had before. So yeah, that's just shout out to the video briefings that we're doing on YouTube.
Fantastic. And just a reminder, we just have one more question, really. So if you have any questions for these guys, if you want to pick their brains about particular aspects, though I know they've been quite comprehensive, which is great. I guess I wanted to end this by talking a bit about personal lessons and some stories of volunteers. And due to time, I might get you guys to just pick one, either personal or professional lesson, or one volunteer story that's been a standout, because I think as has come through in the conversation, so many of us have just learnt so many different lessons and dealt with so many different challenges over the past year. So I think it's really important to reflect on some of those that have come out through this period. So Jane, are you happy to give us one of those?
Sure, Sarah. I'll probably talk more about a standout sort of the story of our volunteers. I think is probably a good way to go. Just thinking about the willingness of our volunteers to remain involved and continuing to support the community. the great thing is I've been able to connect with our community engagement team at City of Melbourne, and through this process we've been able to advertise roles for various organisations that are based or are near the City of Melbourne, which has been fantastic. So we've advertised those roles to our existing volunteers. So those organisations know that there's a certain level of experience that obviously those volunteers have, and they can sort of hit the ground running in many instances. So yeah, we've popped them up onto our volunteer management system or sent it out as a bulk email, and the uptake has been phenomenal. One of them was a homework club run in Carlton, and within, I think, probably 2 to 3 hours, they'd had 20 applications from our volunteer group, which was fantastic. And the organisation has shared some photos and some feedback with us about how fantastic it's all going and how they're able to now run that homework club virtually with this extra support of these volunteers coming through. And another instance that's just come through this week is possibly helping out Puffing Billy with a new role that they've got, and they're asking if we could advertise that through with our volunteers as well. So yeah, I just think all of these things where people are just still willing to be involved and be connected to their community, it's just incredibly humbling. And I think it just demonstrates the power of volunteering and how selfless really our volunteers are. So for me, that's the big takeaway, that, you know, these people are have had something taken away from them, but they're still ready to sort of get up and go as soon as an opportunity arises and presents itself. And that just really keeps me going, I think, and just shows me that, you know, so lucky to be doing what I'm doing and be involved with such a wonderful program. Yeah.
Fantastic. Tara, did you want to share one of those? And I'm sorry we can't have more time to spend on this, but it's amazing how quickly an hour goes when we're all having fun.
I was just going to do, we just, well, all of our volunteers, obviously with the service not being running, I think what we found is there's just been a real sense of, like Jane said, you know, community engagement, connection with staff and fellow volunteers. And, you know, we've had one volunteer, for example, where he usually volunteers with us on a Monday morning, now is volunteering at Food Bank, doing deliveries. And what we're finding is that's when we have our Zoom chats with that group of volunteers on his regular shift, and he's still joining in on the Zoom chats while he's waiting for his truck to be reloaded for the next delivery. So he's still popping in, saying hi to the team, saying hi to us. And he doesn't have to do that. He just wants to do that and wants to be connected. And I just really, you know, just see how positive that is, and just that kind of willingness for connection, but just to really help the community. It's been really fantastic.
That's fantastic. And finally, Melissa.
Yeah, I think on a really similar thread, I think all of our volunteers have just been exceptional during this time. They've taken on the challenges and opportunities with a huge amount of optimism and enthusiasm. And I don't think there's any one standout individual, but our program as a whole, I believe, has been a standout in the way it's been able to adapt and continue to grow and thrive. And this is wholeheartedly credited to our volunteers, because without their willingness to engage in an online program, we wouldn't have been able to continue. So it's just been all credited to them and their keenness and enthusiasm to keep it going. And I think it's really been a period of reflection and learning for myself personally, and for so many others in the community. And it's encouraged me to reflect on what makes me feel happy and how I choose to use my time and energy. And, you know, I think for many, there's been a time to think more about that. And I think the fact that our volunteers are continuing to choose to use their time in engaging with us, it's just really, really positive and heartwarming, and makes me feel wonderful. And I think for our program, from an environmental point of view, you know, it speaks to the importance of nature and biodiversity in our lives, and hopefully we can all come out of this better prepared to act for the environment in our program, and hopefully others in the community too.
Fantastic. And now there is just one question in the chat, which I'll raise with you guys, and it concerns what's on everybody's mind, which is end of year celebrations. And I think more than many years, we're all thinking about how we can celebrate the end of the year. So just wondered if you had any plans for end of year celebrations for your volunteers. Will they be online? Will there be any? Is anyone happy to, Melissa, are you happy to?
Yeah, look, I can speak to that. I mean, it's all going to be dependent on what we're allowed to do and where the restrictions are at that time of year, and also, you know, what City of Melbourne have, you know, City of Melbourne directive, I guess, as well, and Jane can speak more to that. But I have personally, I have my fingers crossed that we might be able to get our small group of volunteers, keeping in mind my program only has 15 active volunteers, so it is a smaller program. So I'm really hopeful that we might be able to get them together in an outdoor setting or something that's, you know, a fairly low risk activity. But look, that's really all going to be dependent on where we're at with restrictions and also, you know, where we're at with City of Melbourne and following any guidelines from them. But yeah, look, I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to do something. If it's not a face-to-face, we'll certainly be looking at what we can do online, or whether it is, you know, personally, you know, delivering things to people, to individuals, or, you know, we'll be thinking about something. I know certainly for Volunteer Week, Jane did a wonderful job putting together things to celebrate our volunteers, and I know my predecessor, Charlotte, who was acting in my role during while I was on maternity leave, she personally delivered cookies and things to our volunteers because we weren't able to get together. And I know they all really appreciated getting those little care packages from Charlotte. So, you know, there are things that we can do to celebrate, even if we're not able to get together face to face.
Great. Now, Jane or Tara, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I'll let Tara add to that, I think. She'll be the best person to talk about that.
Yeah, so Jane and Tara, so pretty much, because we've got such a large volunteer pool of around 400 volunteers, we usually have quite a big end of year celebration at the town hall with all our volunteers and staff. So obviously we don't expect that to happen. So we are kind of thinking of new ways to either do it online, or when we are able to come back, we might need to postpone the celebration. So it's a bit difficult for us because, unlike Melissa, we've got such a large volunteer pool, and the limitations and the density capacity is really a big factor for us to do anything face to face. So it would really have to be either virtually online or something that we could mail to them.
Absolutely. And look, we at Volunteering Victoria are also thinking about our normal, you know, different end of year celebrations. We've got our volunteering state awards coming up, and we're trying to think of innovative ways to keep people connected. So I know that's on a lot of people's mind during the end of the year. So thank you for that question, Connie. If there are no other questions, can I just please thank Jane, Tara and Melissa for their time. Obviously, everyone has a very different COVID story, but I think it's always nice to hear how different programs have managed to adapt and what people have done. We do have one more of these webinars for the year, and details of that one will go up shortly on Volunteering Victoria's website. So thank you all for your time today and logging on. And have a great week. So thank you all.